The grand rotunda of the High Synod was not built for silence, yet silence was the only thing that filled it now, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed against the respiratory gills of the 12 alien dignitaries seated upon the raised dais. This chamber, constructed from the resonance glass of the moon of Valhalla's, was designed to amplify the orations of the mighty, to catch the whispers of diplomats and turn them into the thunder of law. But today, the resonance glass was mute, reflecting only the dim, amber bioluminescence of the council members and the towering holographic projection that dominated the center of the room. The projection displayed a swirling, chaotic abyss, a tear in the fabric of real space that the scientists had named the null horizon. It was a mouth of utter darkness, consuming the light of the binary stars in the Kithran sector, a growing cancer in the void that defied physics, defied logic, and until recently had defied all attempts at communication. It was simply an end, a termination point for matter, and into that maw the Synod had sent a sacrifice. High Archon Xylos shifted his weight on the obsidian throne, his carapace clicking softly against the stone, a sound that seemed deafening in the stillness. He was old, his chitinous armor scarred from the Unification Wars, his 4 eyes milky with the cataracts of age and wisdom, yet they were fixed with a predatory intensity upon the telemetry streams scrolling rapidly alongside the image of the null horizon. He was the one who had signed the order. He was the one who had authorized the deployment of the Prometheus, a vessel that was technically a heavy cruiser but in the face of the anomaly was little more than a gnat flying into a furnace. It was a death sentence. Everyone knew it. The tactical analysts, the astronavigators, the spiritual cast, they had all agreed that the mission was a suicide run, a desperate attempt to deliver a payload of sensory probes deep enough into the event horizon to understand what was killing their galaxy before the ship was crushed into subatomic paste. And because it was a suicide mission, they had not sent a crew of the Kithran ascendancy. They had not sent the noble warrior caste of the Vil, nor the crystalline intellectuals of the Aurak. They had sent the auxiliaries, the humans. "The telemetry is erratic. High Archon," whispered Sub-Overseer Mail, his voice a sibilant hiss that barely registered above the hum of the atmospheric scrubbers. Mail was young, his skin still sleek and unmarred, his mind filled with the arrogance of the Academy. He looked at the scrolling data with a mixture of confusion and disdain. The gravitational shear at the perimeter of the null horizon should have spaghettified the hull structure 3 standard cycles ago. The structural integrity field was rated for Class 4 shear. The readings indicate they are currently experiencing Class 10. It is illogical. The ship should be dust. We should be reading background radiation and the thermal bloom of a reactor breach. Instead, we are reading stability. Xylos did not look away from the holographic abyss. Humans are not logical, Sub-Overseer. That is why we integrated them into the hegemony, is it not? Not for their strength, for their chitin is soft and their bones are brittle. Not for their longevity, for they burn out and die in the blink of a galactic eye. We took them because they possess a peculiar relationship with probability. They deny it. Xylos tapped a claw on the armrest. But even denial has a breaking point. The physics of the null horizon are absolute. Why is the signal still active? The question hung in the air, unanswered. The Prometheus was a relic, a retrofitted cruiser from the previous epoch, gifted to the Terran Union as part of their induction treaty. The aliens had viewed it as a charity, a way to let the primitives play among the stars without giving them the weaponry to hurt themselves or others. The humans had taken the ship, polished it, patched its leaking manifolds, and painted their strange symbols on the hull. They had named it after a myth of their own, a figure who brought fire and suffered for it. Xylos found the name appropriate. He had expected the fire to consume them hours ago. The plan was cold, calculated politics. Sacrifice the human crew to gather data, then use the humans' heroic death to rally the disparate species of the hegemony against the existential threat of the null horizon. It was a narrative already written, the speeches prepared, the monuments commissioned. But the Prometheus was refusing to follow the script. "Expand the sensor gain," Xylos ordered, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "I want to see the vessel, not just the telemetry. Give me visual confirmation. If they are dying, I will witness it. If they are burning, I will watch the fire." The technicians in the pit below the dais scrambled over their consoles, their multifaceted fingers dancing across interfaces of hard light. The holographic projection flickered, the swirling darkness of the anomaly zooming in, the perspective shifting as the long-range scanners fought through the interference of gravitational distortion. Static washed over the image, waves of white noise that sounded like the screaming of the universe itself. Then, the image stabilized. the breath caught in the throats of every being in the chamber. The silence that followed was not one of anticipation, but of profound, unsettling shock. The ship was there, but it was not the ship they had sent. The Prometheus had been a blocky, utilitarian construct of gray metal and exposed conduits, a standard-issue heavy cruiser of the hegemony fleet. What appeared on the screen was something else entirely. The hull was no longer gray. It was glowing with a deep, resonant iridescence, shifting between violet and gold as if the metal itself had become heated to a point of transmutation. Where there had been jagged antennas and sensor arrays, there were now smooth, flowing lines of energy that arced back from the prow like the wings of some great, celestial avian. The ship was not fighting the gravitational tides of the null horizon. It was riding them. It moved with a fluid grace, banking and weaving through the debris field of crushed planets that orbited the anomaly's mouth. The engines, once burning with the harsh blue chemical fire of standard propulsion, now emitted a silent, pulsating white light that left no trail, no exhaust, only a distortion in space-time that rippled outward like a stone dropped in a pond. This is impossible, Mael stammered, stepping back from the railing, his composure shattering. The readings, High Archon, the readings indicate the hull is no longer composed of titanium alloy. It is reading as partially organic, partially energetic. It is as if the ship has metabolized the radiation of the anomaly and used it to rebuild itself, and the energy output. It exceeds the capacity of a stellar Dyson ring. A single cruiser cannot generate that power. It violates the third law of thermodynamics. Xylos leaned forward, his mandibles trembling. "Open a channel," he commanded, his voice low and dangerous. "If there is anyone left alive on that thing, I want to speak to them." High Archon, the interference. "Open the channel," Xylos roared, the sound cracking like a whip. The technicians obeyed instantly. The audio feed crackled, the static hissing and popping, sounding like rain on a tin roof. Then underneath the noise, a sound emerged. It was not the screaming of the dying. It was not the chaotic shouting of a panic-stricken bridge crew. It was music. A slow, rhythmic, haunting melody played on a stringed instrument, accompanied by a low, humming vibration that seemed to resonate in the bones of the listeners. It was a human sound. A cello, perhaps. Xylos remembered the briefing on human culture. They used vibrations to regulate their emotional states. The music faded, replaced by a voice. It was a female voice, calm, rich, and terrifyingly steady. There was no tremor of fear, no breathless rush of adrenaline. It sounded like a librarian reading a report or a teacher addressing a class. "High Synod of the Hegemony, this is Captain Alara Vance of the Prometheus," the voice said. "We received your ping. Apologies for the delay in response. We were calibrating." Xylos stared at the glowing vessel on the screen. "Calibrating?" he repeated, his translator struggling to convey the sheer incredulity in his tone. "Captain Vance, you are inside the Roch limit of a Class Alpha spatial rupture. Your vessel was projected to suffer total structural failure 4 hours ago. You were sent to deploy probes and withdraw. Report your status immediately. How are you alive?" There was a pause on the line, a moment where the only sound was the background hum of that impossible engine. Then Vance spoke again, her voice tinged with a strange, unplaceable emotion. It wasn't pride exactly. It was something deeper. "We deployed the probes, High Archon. They were destroyed instantly. The gravitational shear was far beyond the theoretical models your science council provided. The Prometheus began to buckle within minutes of crossing the threshold. We lost decks 4 through 9. We lost the primary reactor. We lost life support." "Then you are dead," Mael blurted out. "You are ghosts." "We should be," Vance agreed, her tone conversational. "By all your metrics, we are dead. But you see, High Archon, when the primary reactor failed, we didn't try to restart it. We realized that fighting the anomaly was what was killing us. The energy density outside the hull was infinite. We were trying to hold a teacup together inside a hurricane, so we stopped fighting. We opened the intakes. We dropped the shields." A gasp went through the chamber. Dropping shields in a radiation storm was madness. It was "Uicide." "You surrendered to the void?" Xylos asked, horrified. "We adapted," Vance corrected gently. "Our chief engineer, Mr. Kotler, theorized that the anomaly wasn't just destruction, it was high-energy data, it was structure. We rerouted the intake manifolds to accept the exotic particles instead of filtering them. We let the anomaly flow through the ship. It changed things. It changed the hull. It changed the systems. It changed us. We didn't just survive the storm, High Archon. We became the storm." The image on the screen zoomed in further, showing the bridge of the Prometheus. The viewport was no longer glass, it was a transparent membrane of energy. And standing there, visible even at this distance, was the crew. They were not strapped into crash couches, screaming. They were standing, working. Their movements were fluid, precise. And there was a glow about them, a faint aura that matched the luminescence of the ship. "We are returning to the rendezvous point," Vance continued. "But we are bringing something back with us, the anomaly. It isn't just a hole in space, it's a door, and we found the key." The line went dead, leaving the council in a stunned silence that was heavier than before. Xylos sat back, his mind reeling. The humans had been underestimated. It was the fatal flaw of the hegemony. They looked at the soft skin and the short lifespans and saw weakness. They did not see the terrifying adaptability of a species that had evolved on a death world, a species that treated apocalypse as a Tuesday afternoon inconvenience. The Prometheus was coming back. But Xylos knew, with a certainty that chilled his blood, that the ship returning was not the ship that left. And the humans returning were no longer just auxiliaries. They were something else, something new. The transition from the High Synod to the orbital docking spire was a blur of panic and protocol. The arrival of the Prometheus, or whatever the Prometheus had become, was the single most significant event in the last 1,000 cycles of hegemony history. Fleets were mobilized not to attack but to escort. The defense grid was lowered, a gesture of trust that terrified the military commanders. Xylos stood in the observation gallery of the spire, surrounded by his generals and scientists, watching as the vessel approached. In person, the ship was even more breathtaking. It dwarfed the escort destroyers not in size but in presence. The light it emitted was soothing, almost hypnotic. It didn't displace space. It seemed to negotiate with it, sliding into the docking cradle with a gentleness that belied its immense mass. The docking clamps failed to lock. There was nothing for them to grab. The hull of the Prometheus simply merged with the station's field, holding itself in place with perfect magnetic equilibrium. When the airlock cycled, Xylos expected a decontamination crew. He expected medical teams carrying stretchers. Instead, the doors slid open, not the mechanical grind of gears, but a silent dissolve of matter, and Captain Alara Vance stepped out. She was a woman of perhaps 40 Earth years, her hair streaked with gray, her uniform the standard blue of the Terran Navy. But her eyes were pools of shifting starlight. She did not walk so much as glide, her boots making no sound on the deck. Behind her came her senior staff, Kotler the engineer, whose hands were covered in intricate, glowing, geometric tattoos that seemed to move under his skin, and Dr. Aris, the xenobiologist, who carried a datapad that looked like a shard of crystal. The gathered alien dignitaries stepped back involuntarily. There was a pressure radiating from the humans, a palpable wave of static charge. "High Archon," Vance said, bowing her head slightly. It was a gesture of respect, yet it felt like a queen bowing to a pauper. "We have returned." Xylos stepped forward, forcing himself to stand tall. He was the leader of 1,000,000,000,000 beings. He would not cower before a species that had discovered FTL travel only 2 centuries ago. "Captain Vance, the visual records do not do you justice. You have changed." "We have evolved," Vance replied. Her voice did not echo. It arrived directly in the listener's center of hearing, clear and unpolluted by distance. "The null horizon is not a weapon, High Archon. It is a test, a filter, the precursors, the ones you call the architects. They left it there." "The architects?" Sub-Overseer Male stepped forward, his curiosity overcoming his fear. "That is a myth, a religious fable. There is no evidence of the architects." Kotler the engineer laughed. It was a warm, booming sound. "We are the evidence, little one. Look at our ship. We didn't build those engines, we grew them. The anomaly is a reservoir of nanotech and exotic matter dormant for 1 billion years, waiting for a consciousness compatible enough to activate it. You sent probes, machines. The anomaly ate them because they were dead matter, you sen. Us, and we are chaos. We are life. We are illogical, emotional, stubborn life. That is the key. The interface required a biological will to override the safety protocols." Xylos felt a chill run down his spine. "You mean to tell me that the great darkness consuming our stars is a gift?" "Library," Vance corrected. "A library that requires a steep library card. You have to be willing to die to enter it. You have to be willing to let go of what you are to become what you need to be." She looked around the docking bay at the rows of armed guards, the fearful politicians, the vast machinery of the hegemony that was built on order, control, and stagnation. "You were afraid of the dark, High Archon, so you threw us into it. You hoped we would plug the hole. Instead, we turned on the lights." "And now," Xylos asked, his voice barely a whisper, What do you intend to do with this? Power? You could destroy the hegemony in an afternoon, that ship. I can feel its reactor from here. It is a star in a bottle. Vance smiled, and for the first time she looked human again, tired, burdened, but kind. Destroy you? Why? Because you underestimated us, because you treated us as expendable, she shook her head. We are humans, High Archon. We don't just survive, we build. We don't just conquer, we befriend. We bond with packs of predators and turn them into pets. We take poison and turn it into medicine. We took your death sentence and turned it into a promotion. She gestured to the viewport where the Prometheus pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic light. We aren't here to conquer the hegemony, we're here to save it. The null horizon is expanding not because it is malevolent, but because it is leaking. It's a dam that's breaking. We fixed the leak on our side, but the pressure is building. We need to go back, and we need help, not your ships, they'll be crushed. We need your minds. We need the Vil for their discipline. We need the Aurak for their computation. We need the Krellian logistical networks. You want to take us in there? Mail asked, his eyes wide. We want to upgrade you, Kotler said, grinning, if you're brave enough. The proposition hung in the air, heavy with historical weight. The hegemony had stood for 10,000 years on the principle that the elders led and the young followed. Now the youngest, most fragile race was offering a hand to pull the elders out of the mud. It was an inversion of the natural order. It was terrifying, and it was the only hope they had. Xylos looked at Vance, really looked at her, past the glowing eyes and the aura of power, and saw the steel underneath. He saw the species that had nuked itself and survived, that had plagued its own biosphere and fixed it, that had reached for the stars with chemical rockets and duct tape. He saw the resilience that the hegemony had bred out of itself in favor of comfort and stability. The Council will debate this, Xylos said formally, though he knew the debate was a formality. But, tell me, Captain, when the ship was breaking apart, when the radiation was melting the bulkheads, what did you say to your crew? How did you keep them from madness? Vance's expression softened, her gaze drifting back toward her ship. I didn't have to say anything, High Archon. When the walls fell away and the void stared back at us, my crew didn't scream. They held hands, they watched the colors. One of my ensigns, he started singing, just a quiet folk song from his home. Then another joined in. Then another. We faced the end of existence with a melody. That's what humans do. We sing in the dark. The hours that followed were a diplomatic hurricane. The Prometheus, now referred to in hushed tones as the Ascendant, remained docked, a silent titan resting among tugboats. The human delegation was ushered into the Grand Rotunda, the very chamber where their death warrant had been signed. But the atmosphere was different now. The fear was still there, yes, but it was mixed with awe. The humans walked with a calm certainty that unnerved the ancient counselors. They did not sit at the low table reserved for auxiliaries. They stood in the center of the room, their glowing forms casting long shadows against the holographic charts. The debate raged. The conservative factions of the hegemony, led by the insectoid hive mind of the Clacks, argued that the humans were a threat, that they had been corrupted by the anomaly and were now agents of chaos. They demanded the ship be quarantined, dissected, the crew vivisected to understand the nature of their transformation. You speak of dissection, Kotler interrupted, his voice booming without a microphone, while we speak of salvation. You want to cut us open to see how the engine works? We are the engine. He raised his hand, and the holographic projector in the center of the room flickered, obeying his gesture without a command input. The image changed from the menacing void to a complex, beautiful lattice of energy, a schematic of the galaxy, but interconnected, alive. This is what the architects built, a neural network of wormholes. The null horizon is just one node. There are thousands. You have been crawling through the dark using chemical fire when you could have been stepping across the stars. Captain Vance stepped forward, placing a hand on Kotler's arm to steady him. Her approach was less aggressive, more diplomatic. High Counselor's fear is a reasonable reaction. You look at us and you see monsters, you see the unknown. But ask yourselves, what has your stagnation bought you? The void tide is eating your outer colonies. Your economy is stagnant. Your culture is recycling the same art for a millennium. You are dying slowly. We are offering you a chance to be reborn. She looked directly at Xylos. We are going back into the horizon. We have established a stable beachhead within the singularity, a pocket of calmness where the laws of physics are negotiable. We call it the Eye. We can bring ships there, shield them with our hull, and retrofit them. We can teach you how to listen to the universe instead of fighting it. And the price? Xylos asked. There is always a price. The price is your pride, Vance said simply. You have to admit that you don't know everything. You have to admit that the soft humans, the short-lived auxiliaries, found the path that you missed. You have to treat us as equals, not as subjects, not as pets, equals. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Equality. The hegemony was built on hierarchy. To grant the humans equal standing was to upend 10,000 years of political dogma. But then the alarm klaxons blared. The room bathed in crimson light. The holographic display snapped back to the tactical view. The null horizon was flaring. A tendril of darkness, a gravity whip, had lashed out from the anomaly, striking a nearby star system, the Vil homeworld system. "Report," Xylos screamed. "Gravitational surge detected," a technician cried out. "The Vil sun, it is destabilizing. The tidal forces are tearing the planetary crusts apart. Evacuation is impossible. Time to impact, 40 minutes. Silence fell again, 40 minutes. A billion lives. The Vil representative, a towering warrior named Thok, slumped in his chair, his 4 arms hanging limp. "My people," he rumbled, his voice breaking. "It is the end." Vance looked at the screen, then at her crew. A silent communication passed between them, a nod of consensus. She turned back to Xylos. "No," she said, "it is not." "Captain," Xylos said, "it takes 3 days to travel to the Vil system at maximum warp. You cannot get there." "We don't use warp anymore," Vance said. "Kotler, spin up the drive. Aris, calculate the resonance frequency of the Vil star." "Already done, Captain," Aris replied, tapping on her crystal pad. "We can resonate the Ascendant's hull with the star's core. We can act as a chaotic attractor, draw the tidal stress into ourselves." "It will hurt," Kotler warned, though he was smiling. "We can take it," Vance said. She looked at Thok. "Counselor, tell your people to look up. We're coming." Before the council could protest, before they could even comprehend the madness of the plan, the humans dissolved into light and vanished from the chamber. Telemetry showed the Ascendant undocking from the station with violent speed. There was no acceleration curve. One moment it was there, the next, space folded in on itself, a brilliant flash of violet light, and the ship was gone. "Get me the Vil system feed," Xylos roared. The view screen shifted. The Vil star was angry, roiling with solar flares, distorted into an oval shape by the gravity whip of the anomaly. The planets were shaking, continents cracking. It was a scene of apocalypse. Then a tear in space opened directly between the star and the anomaly's tendril. The Ascendant burst forth, not as a ship, but as a burning lance of light. It positioned itself directly in the path of the gravitational shear. "They are interposing," Mail shouted. "They are acting as a shield." "They cannot withstand that mass," Thok whispered, watching his world's doom. "It is the weight of a black hole." On the screen, the Ascendant began to glow brighter, shifting from violet to blinding white. The gravity whip struck the ship. The impact sent a shockwave through the sensor grid that blinded the long-range scanners for a moment. When the image returned, the ship was still there. It was vibrating, blurring at the edges. Vance's voice cut through the static, strained, gritted, but defiant. "Hold the line." The ship expanded. It physically grew, the energy field extending outward like a net, catching the gravitational tendrils, tangling them, absorbing the kinetic energy. The hull of the ship groaned, a sound transmitted through the subspace bands, a sound like a god in pain. The Vil star began to settle. The stress was being siphoned away, channeled into the Ascendant and dead into the subspace foam. "Energy output is off the scale," the technician reported, his voice trembling. "They are channeling more power than the entire hegemony fleet combined. Their hull temperature is approaching Planck variance. They are burning up." "Captain Vance," Xylos shouted into the comms. "Disengage. You have stabilized the star. Save yourselves." "Not yet," came the reply. "We have to sever the connection." On the screen, the Ascendant pulsed once, a heartbeat of pure light that outshone the star behind it. Then a beam of energy lashed out from the ship, not towards the star, but back towards the null horizon. It was a counterstrike, a spear of reverse entropy thrown back into the dark. The beam struck the anomaly's tendril and shattered it. The gravity whip snapped, recoiling back into the void. The Vil system was safe. But the Ascendant was drifting. The light was fading from its hull. It looked gray, scorched, lifeless. "Scan them," Thok bellowed. "Are they alive?" "No readings," the technician said. "Total power failure, life signs, indeterminate." A heavy sorrow settled over the council. They had just witnessed a miracle, and the price had been the miracle workers themselves. Xylos felt a pang of guilt so sharp it nearly doubled him over. He had sent them to die once, and they survived. They had volunteered to die twice, and this time. "Wait," Mail whispered. "Look." On the screen, the scorched hull of the Ascendant was cracking. Flakes of burnt metal were drifting away. But underneath was not darkness. Underneath was gold. The ship was molting. Like a cicada shedding its skin, the outer layers of the Ascendant broke away, revealing a new form beneath. This one was pure energy, held in the shape of a ship by force of will alone. It was translucent, beautiful, terrifying. The comms crackled. "Systems rebooting," Vance's voice came through, sounding exhausted but amused. "That was a little close. Kotler says we blew a fuse." Cheering erupted in the grand rotunda. It was a sound never heard there before, the unreserved, emotional release of a dozen different species. Thok, the warrior, was openly weeping. Xylos sat back in his throne, his hearts beating in a chaotic rhythm. They were not just alive, they were effectively immortal. They had taken the fury of a gravity whip and used it to temper their hull, to refine themselves further. Act 3, the unity and the larger twist. In the weeks that followed the Vil incident, the galaxy changed. It did not change through war or decree, but through a fundamental shift in perspective. The humans of the Ascendant did not hoard their power. They kept their promise. They opened the eye. Krellian scientists were invited aboard the ship. Vil engineers worked alongside Kotler to understand the organic circuitry. The Orc philosophers debated ethics with Vance. The hegemony began to realize that their rigid caste system was a cage, and the humans had brought the key. But the true revelation came when the Ascendant finally led a joint fleet back into the null horizon. Xylos, too old for space travel by medical standards, refused to be left behind. He stood on the bridge of the Ascendant, a bridge that felt more like a cathedral of light as they crossed the event horizon. There was no turbulence this time. The Ascendant emitted a harmonic frequency that calmed the spatial storms. They passed through the crushing dark and emerged somewhere else. They were not in another galaxy. They were not in a parallel dimension. They were inside a megastructure. The null horizon was not a natural phenomenon. It was a Dyson sphere of incomprehensible scale built around a cluster of black holes. But the interior was not dark. It was lined with data strata, glowing cities the size of solar systems, and archives of knowledge that spanned eons. The architects, Xylos breathed, looking at the vista on the holographic walls. They didn't leave, they hid. "They're sleeping," Vance said softly. "This whole place, it's a stasis pod, a lifeboat." "From what?" Mail asked. "What could threaten beings who build black hole spheres?" Vance gestured to the far distance of the interior, where the light of the data cities faded into a different kind of darkness, a cold, entropy-less gray. From the heat death of the universe, they realized that entropy was inevitable, so they built this, a pocket outside of time. They're waiting for the universe to die so they can be there for the rebirth, to start the next cycle. "And us?" Xylos asked. "Why did the door open for us?" "Because the cycle is ending," Vance said. She turned to face the alien leaders. Her face was solemn. "The universe is old, Xylos, older than your scientists think. The fabric is wearing thin. That's why the null horizon was leaking. The architects are waking up, but they need caretakers. They need a species that can bridge the gap between the chaotic biological life of the DNG universe and the ordered, crystalline existence of the next one." She held up her hand, and it glowed with the golden light of the ship. "They chose us. Not because we are the smartest or the strongest, but because we are the most stubborn, because we refuse to accept the end. We looked at the void and sang to it. That is the qualification." The realization hit Xylos with the force of a physical blow. The humans were not just auxiliaries. They were the inheritors. The hegemony with its wars and politics was a sandbox game. This was the real work. "So," Xylos said, feeling very small and yet, for the first time in centuries, filled with purpose. "What do we do?" "We wake them up gently," Vance said. "We repair the leaks. We bring the best of our cultures, your art, the Vil's honor, the Orac's logic, and we store it here. We make sure that when the universe fades, we aren't forgotten. We become the seeds for the next Big Bang." She smiled, a human smile full of impossible hope. "It's a big job. We're going to need a lot of ships and a lot of friends." Xylos looked out at the magnificent, terrifying architecture of the precursors, then back at the small, soft human woman who commanded the power of a god. He bowed, deeply and truly. "The hegemony is yours to command, Captain Vance." No, Vance shook her head. Not command, partner, we do this together, or we don't do it at all. As the fleet moved forward into the golden depths of the sphere, the Ascendant took point, its hull shining like a new star. It was the ship that was supposed to die. It was the crew that was supposed to be a sacrifice. Instead, they had become the lantern bearers at the end of time, guiding the galaxy into the long, beautiful night, ready to dream of the morning to come. The legend of the Ascendant would be told for 1 billion years, not as a story of war, but as the story of the day the galaxy stopped being afraid of the dark and learned to live within it. The ship that died to become a legend, and in doing so, made legends of them all.